Will there be another freeze? Is it time to plant my tomatoes? Can I squeeze in another round of cool season crops, or is it too late? If questions like these have been ruminating in your mind recently, you're not alone. Early spring can feel like summer in my Austin garden, but we have to stay ready as winter's last stand may be lingering just around the bend. So in this video, I'll cover 12 essential vegetables to grow in March for Central Texas gardeners and similar growing zones. I'm Scott from New Garden Road, always out here to inform, inspire, and elevate you. Encouraging biodiversity and restoring habitat is my mission, one garden at a time. Before we get into this list of crops, I want to go over a few key elements that relate to the timing of planting these right now. One thing to keep in mind is that in our Central Texas growing region, the spring season is often a period of rapid transition that gets warm really quickly. And this can be stressful for plants, depending on the type of weather they like to grow in, but also when they mature and we will be harvesting from them. So that's a very important point in the timing that you need to make sure you have targeted really well. So for instance, if I'm planting something from seed and it takes 30 days to mature, I can get that in and I can harvest it pretty rapidly before the seasonal temperatures really start to soar. And when we consider the effects of environmental stress on these plantings, what we will often see is an increase in the potential for damage by seasonal pest pressure, and disease. And I'm talking about 90 degrees and up. That's all it takes to really exert some stress. For an extended period, several days, a week or more, timing is so essential. It's really important in the vegetable garden, and maybe nowhere more so than Central Texas. Number one on this list is beans, or specifically snap beans. I'm talking about good old green beans. Now we have to differentiate these from some of the more heat-loving varieties such as southern peas, which you might know by the name of black-eyed peas, but there are so many varieties that you can experiment with. Also, yard-long beans. Those can take the heat better than green beans. Another one you want to differentiate these from is English snap and snow peas. True peas have a hollow stem. Those like cool temperatures to mature. And in our area, we're planting them in the fall as the heat breaks, hopefully in the month of October, or we can do it again in January. But that is going to be too cool for the green beans that I'm talking about. And likewise, if we wait to plant these, it's going to be too hot. A lot of these can produce in around 50 to 60 days. So getting them in early March will ensure that you're going to get your harvest before things really heat up into late April. Number two on the list may come as a surprise to you, but I want to talk about beets. Now, we can grow these in the fall over the winter. They'll grow really slowly as the days are shorter and the sun is lower on the horizon. And I think even into the month of March, we've got a window to get those in. The key to remember with beets and with all of these crops that we're going to talk about in this video is the days to harvest. When you look on the seed package, or if you've got a transplant, the tag that comes in that little starter plant, you want to look at how long it takes to mature. So something like beets, you may find varieties that can be ready in 50 to 60 days, or some of them might take longer in the range of 80 days. So choose something that's faster to produce, like the beets that I have here, the Early Wonder. This is a really great choice to plant in March. You're more likely to get them, to produce and harvest before things heat up. Coming in at number 3 on the list, one of my all-time favorites to grow in the garden, hands down, it's corn. Now, this is such a dramatic crop. It really changes the environment in the garden. The sound that the leaves make as they get really, really tall and start to dry out, I just think is really, really amazing. Now, there are different types of corn that you can grow. A lot of people will target a sweet corn. In the past, I've grown the Golden Bantam Improved. That one's pretty fast to mature. We're talking about around 70-75 days. So that's how you get while the getting's good. And like many of the crops in this list, what happens is once we get to that threshold where we're above 90 consistently, that can begin to interfere with pollination of plants because the pollen can actually be rendered sterile. Then you won't have fruit set, or in this case, the kernel of corn is not going to get pollinated properly. So if you've ever grown corn or melons, or even tomatoes during the time of year when it starts to get really hot and you're just kind of confused because maybe you're seeing bees and you're not getting fruit set, it could be because of the heat. And next on the list is cucumbers. Who doesn't love a tasty, cool cucumber in the springtime? Now, in the past, I've grown a lot of these Suyo Long. That one is just really, really cool in my book because it gets really big. It's kind of fruity in nature, and it tends to take the heat pretty well. If you've grown the Market More or the Straight 8, some of those pickling cucumbers, slicing cucumbers, you may be familiar with some of those old timers, they will turn bitter when it gets hot. And that's not good because once they turn bitter, they're done. They're not going to be not bitter. Now, you can plant successively and hopefully get some tiered plants coming in behind it to produce for you, but they'll still be susceptible to the environmental conditions. Nonetheless, these can produce really quickly, around 50 to 60 days, so get them in early March and you'll be in good shape. Likewise, I have to mention the world of cucumber melons. Now, we were just talking about cucumbers, which the botanical name is Cucumis sativa. What I'm talking about with cucumber melons is Cucumis milo, so a different species. If you've ever heard of the Armenian cucumber, that's a cucumber melon. It's not a true cucumber. And the reason those can do so well for us is because they have more of those genetic traits that can endure the heat a bit better, and they don't turn bitter in the heat. They will still suffer the same fate as, like the corn and other crops that I mentioned, with an impediment to their pollination when things get really toasty. But the cucumber melons are fun to explore. I discovered them a few years ago as I met the owner of cucumbershop.com in the comment section of one of my videos about Suyo Long cucumbers, and I had no idea what I was getting into. The varieties that are available are truly amazing. Many southern Italian varieties from Tunisia, also from India. You've got a lot to explore there. You can adapt some to your own specific garden. But like the cucumbers, the cucumber melons, I think you should get them in as soon as possible. Coming in at number 5 on the list, it's squash. And this includes both summer and winter squash, as well as pumpkin varieties. I'm always really hopeful about an abundant crop of squash in my spring and early summer garden. But there is one pesky critter that makes it a little bit difficult to get that in your harvest basket, and that's the squash vine borer. Now, I've got a whole video that discusses the myths and some of the tried and true methods that I've developed over the last few years for growing squash successfully here in my Austin garden. We can differentiate a little bit here, and if we look at summer squash in particular, many of these varieties can start to set fruit in as little as 50 days, and that's pretty darn good. You can get some in really quickly. If you're growing the winter squash, they may set up their fruit in about the same amount of time. It could take a little bit longer, but then they will be on the vine, maturing, with regular moisture, preferably from drip irrigation. You're going to come out really well, even if those winter squash are out in the garden into the heat of summer. And the same logic would also apply to growing pumpkins. One of the other benefits to getting your squash in early is that hopefully you can get some fruit before the squash vine borer becomes active. This is a great strategy to try. I'm not guaranteeing that you will have success with this, but it's certainly worth a shot because squash is an awesome thing to grow and harvest fresh from your garden. Coming in at number 6 and rounding out the first half of this list is one of those crops that just is irresistible to so many gardeners. As a matter of fact, this is the only crop that some people will grow, and that is tomatoes. In a stark contrast to the crops that we've discussed so far, which all would be best planted from seed directly in the garden, meaning you don't need to start them in a seed tray or start them indoors or anything of that nature. They're just really going to do best when you put them straight out in the garden. Tomatoes will be planted from transplants or seedlings. So that's a little plant start that you can likely find at your local nursery. A lot of folks will start their seeds indoors in early January, and that's a great way to get them going. You have to navigate this season here in the spring in Central Texas. It's just not real ideal for growing crops like tomatoes. We have a short window when the weather cooperates and you can get some good fruit set. There's less instances of moisture stress. You get a nicely uniform fruit, and the pest pressure is lower too. So getting them in from transplants will assure that things will time out, and probably by maybe late May, early June, your tomatoes are rolling in. Next up at number 7 is Swiss chard. Now, this one might be a little bit of a surprise to you as well, because this is one that we can establish well into the fall and the winter months. And quite often, I have them survive for multiple seasons, as many as 3 or 4 years. But we did talk about beets earlier, and you should know that Swiss chard is the exact same botanical name as beets. That's Beta vulgaris. So it's just been cultivated for a different trait, and that is those nice broad leaves, those thick, mid-rib stems that are really tasty and nutritious. So Swiss chard and beets are really the same thing, but the beets and those types have been selected for the root. Nonetheless, you can plant them both now, and with this, in the case of Swiss chard, I think you'll get some tasty greens pretty quickly. And if it were me, I would be looking for transplants of Swiss chard, because I know that I will be able to harvest them much more rapidly than if I start from seed right now. So that would be a differentiation between Swiss chard and beets. Beets as a root crop, I would definitely direct sow, but the Swiss chard right now in March, I would go for a transplant. All right, we've covered a lot of territory so far, but when it comes to the 12 essential crops to grow in March for Central Texas, as we get to the back half, I've labeled this section Pump the Brakes, because if we're experiencing weather trends that are on the cooler side, and in particular with a couple of options here, you want to, wait a little bit. Mid to late March will be just fine, but you don't want to wait too long either. And for these, I'm going to do some bundling. So coming in at number 8 and 9, I want to talk about cantaloupe and watermelon. Now, these are often 80 to 100 days to produce. We want to be harvesting these in the month of June primarily, because we know it could be 105 every day, which would be really too much for them. They're going to need a lot of water. They're going to need some shade cloth, liquid seaweed applied weekly. That can help, but it's just really hard to get reliable crop production when environmental conditions are that extreme. Nonetheless, I feel like it's irresistible. We got to grow some cantaloupe and watermelon, and if you've got the space in the garden to let these vines sprawl out and go wild, it is so much fun. And these will also be in that category of direct sowing. You want to get those seeds planted directly in your garden soil, water them until they germinate, and then they will be off to the races. And now we're moving on to number 10 and 11. I'm talking about eggplants and peppers. These will both be in the category of tomatoes. You want to plant them from transplants or seedlings. These seedlings have been grown from seed probably 8 to 10 weeks prior, so they've really got a head start. They've got a good root system. You can get those established in the garden in mid to late March, and they can come on really well for you. I will say eggplants have been a really good option. If you like eggplants, they can grow really well in the heat. They may ebb and flow, during some of the extremes. They may get a little bit quiet, but they can survive. And many times I have cut these plants back just thinking this is the end of the road, and they fully reemerged. Brand new eggplants set fruit and did really well. So just about anything is possible if you give these plants a chance. Now, peppers, a little bit of a different story. Many times early in my gardening journey, I would plant these a little bit late in the spring, maybe in the month of April or, touching on May. And I found it really difficult to get consistent fruit set. And what would happen is I would nurture them all summer long, just crossing my fingers, hoping something would come through. And in the fall, finally, if you really stick with it, these can perk up and set on a flush of peppers in dramatic fashion. That's not necessarily what we want. So get these in earlier in the month of March from a strong, healthy transplant from your local nursery, and you'll be in much better shape. Also, when we talk about peppers, it has been said, and I think many gardeners and farmers will share this opinion, the more mild peppers can do a little bit better in the heat than some of the spicier peppers. If you're growing a really hot and spicy jalapeno and it gets a little bit quiet when the temperatures start to get around 100 degrees, don't be surprised. But something like one of my all-time favorites, the shishito pepper, This can be a spicy one, but many times it's more on the mild side. Those will continue to produce throughout the summer. Now, during the hottest periods of the summer, they'll be smaller. They just really kind of struggle to be robust. When we talk about the timing and the weather conditions, we also have to understand that when we set the stage for the garden with the right plants at the right time, the soil is healthy, they've got the right amount of light, they're getting the right amount of water, then they will just grow in a robust fashion. When any of those factors, including the environmental conditions and those trends, start to get a little bit skewed, it's going to make a difference. You're not going to get a perfect pepper, but you can grow some peppers. I believe in you. Get them in the ground. Now, rounding out our list at number 12 is warm season greens. Now, this is a broad category, just a very general term, but I'm talking about crops like Molokia, also known as Egyptian spinach. This is a superfood, and it can take the heat like a champ. I think you can wait a little bit later into March, even April, to get these seeded out. The sooner you get them started, the sooner you'll begin harvesting them. Also in that category, I would look at amaranth varieties, whether it's a flowering amaranth, which flowers are really important. We didn't really cover those in this video, but amaranth varieties such as callaloo, that's another really nutritious green. I've also grown the red-leafed amaranth, 30% protein, full of essential vitamins and minerals, and they will really do well for you. These are much more reliable than if you want to try some regular spinach, some traditional varieties there. Those just won't really like our spring conditions as we move into the months of April and May. Another one that you could look at is the Malabar spinach. This one needs a trellis to grow on. It does have a much thicker leaf. Some folks might not like that as well, but I think it's pretty tasty, and anything that is resilient as this crop deserves some credit in our growing region. Along with that, it's got a lot of nutrition. So do you want to feed yourself? Do you want to be self-sustaining? Do you have a homestead? Look at some of these alternative warm season greens and get you some. Moving on to bloopers. Take a drink of water. Got some coffee. Yeah, welcome everyone. I'm Scott from New Garden Road. What? Started off great. Yeah, nice chair I got for $1. Now check out more awesome gardening videos on my channel. Like this video and follow New Garden Road for weekly content. You can grow your own food. Keep it organic.